If I were to say the name Lou Costello and tell you to put that name in the context of sports, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For just about everyone, it's the Who's on First sketch as a part of Abbott and Costello, regarded by many as the greatest comedic duo of all time. And if that's what you thought, I don't blame you one bit, because Who's on First is absolutely iconic and might be the most famous comedy act of all time, and maybe the most genius and greatest comedy sketch ever. Anything from the 1940s that is still just as popular today as it was back then has to be considered timeless, and Costello is somewhat of a genius for his comedic style, especially with that routine. Heck, if this video inspires you to watch that skit, I've done my job. And if you haven't seen that sketch, then you're missing out and need to see it as soon as possible. Because I remember the first time I watched that sketch back in 2009 at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And all these years later, it's just as funny and as memorable as it was back then. However, I bring that up because that's not Lou Costello's only contribution to sports. Sure, that sketch might be his most famous, and it's a staple of baseball, but he also made contributions on the gridiron in a bizarre way, when he was part of a feud between the Los Angeles Dons of the AAFC and the Los Angeles Rams of the NFL. And seeing as the NFL, in a long overdue move, officially recognized the stats of the AAFC like they did with the AFL, which I don't get why that wasn't a thing before, seeing as the two leagues had a partial merger, I figure now was a good time to talk about one of the crazier stories in AAFC history that you probably not heard of before. Because this is the story behind Lou Costello and the feud between the Rams and the Dons. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL, or other leagues that the NFL has recognized via merger, like the AFL and the AAFC. So if you like that sort of stuff, and you want to see daily content on things that you never knew before, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and grow this community even more. And with that in mind, let's talk about who's in trouble here. Not the first baseman, I mean in the general sense. You get the idea. Let's dive into it. Before I talk about the actual conflict in question and how bizarre it was, we need some context to understand the game that this took place during, which somehow, I kid you not, there is actual footage of. I have no idea how there's honest-to-God footage of a game from 1946 in the AAFC, but there is. With that in mind, it's December 1st, 1946, and we find ourselves at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum for this late-season game between the Buffalo Bisons and the Los Angeles Dons. In terms of the standings, this game is completely and utterly meaningless. Only the division winners make it to the playoffs to play in the championship game, and the division winners had long been decided by this point, with the Cleveland Browns winning the West and the New York Yankees winning the East. Having said that, the Dons enter this game having won 3 of their last 4, and this game is the rubber match of the 2-game series between the sides, seeing as the first game ended in a 21-21 tie. So the Dons were looking to pick up right where they left off, and were looking to break the tie on their home field. And this game was not a 21-21 tie, I'll put it that way. Because in a game that can only be described as a bloodbath, the Los Angeles Dons defeated the Buffalo Bisons by a final score of 62-14. It was the record for most points scored by any team in an AAFC game at the time, although oddly enough, the record was literally broken 1 week later when the Cleveland Browns dropped 66 on the Brooklyn Dodgers. Kind of amazing that across the NFL and the AAFC, we went over a decade without a 60-point game. And then, 2 of them happened in back-to-back weeks, but I digress. The point is that this game was complete and utter domination, as you've been able to tell from these highlights. The Dons scored 9 touchdowns and never trailed at any point, thanks in part to a defense that forced 3 turnovers and held the Bisons to just 69 yards rushing on 2.3 yards per carry, and an offense that accumulated 607 yards, with 263 yards on the ground and another 344 through the air. The Dons had 8 players record at least 15 yards on the ground. That seems almost impossible to do, and it feels like something that could not happen in today's NFL. But when you've got a guy on your team who runs for 17 yards, and he's your 8th leading rusher during the game, you clearly did something right. It also helps when you got a quarterback in Charlie O'Rourke who finishes the game perfect, as he went 7 for 7 with 141 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a perfect passer rating of 158.3. All in all, this game was a dominant effort, and for the 27,000 Dons fans in attendance at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum who got to see their ball club win their 3rd straight game, with some of them even getting in for only $1, they witnessed a show as they got bang for their buck. It seemed like just about everything was going right during this game right here for the Dons, except for, well, one thing. Because of the 27,000 fans in attendance during this game right here, one of them happened to be the acclaimed and super famous comedian Lou Costello, who was living in Los Angeles at the time. And by this point in the 1940s, even though Costello's career was as strong as ever, there was something weighing on his mind, and that was his charity, the Lou Costello Jr. Youth Foundation, which aided those with rheumatic fever and provided a place for youth in Los Angeles to hang out and stay off the streets, which was noticeable when 6 months after the facility was created, juvenile crime went down by 17%. The charity was named after his son, who he just lost a few years before after he tragically drowned in a pool before turning 1 year old. And Costello, being super passionate about this charity, not just because it was in honor of his son, but because he had dealt with many episodes of rheumatic fever before, thought that a great way to raise money for his charity was to have the Battle of Los Angeles. You had the Los Angeles Dons in the AAFC, and you had the Los Angeles Rams in the NFL, who had literally just moved over here after winning the NFL championship in Cleveland in 1945, making them the only team in NFL history to ever relocate immediately after winning a title. The Dons were all in on this game. Not only would it be good money for a good cause, but it would be a way to test their superiority against NFL opposition, since the NFL was widely regarded as the stronger, more established league. The Rams, on the other hand, not so much. Because while the Dons were open to helping out Costello, the Rams were not willing to play the game for reasons that we're going to get into. And that's where Costello decided to do something. Because during this game we've been watching between the Dons and the Bisons, in the middle of the contest, Costello went upstairs to the public address system. I would ask how he got access in the first place, but let's be honest, it's freaking Lou Costello. That's like asking how someone like Adam Sandler gets access into a restricted area during a game today. He's got the notoriety and the star power. Anyways, Costello went to the public address system, got on the mic, and announced to all the fans in attendance that the Los Angeles Rams were scared to play the Dons. The team in the NFL? They're too scared to play this Dons team for the Battle of Los Angeles because they might lose, since the Dons are so good. Also, they don't care about charity. In other words, Costello was applying pressure on the Rams to accept the game and help out his charity. And seeing as he couldn't get anything done behind the scenes, he was going to make the controversy go public. It might even convert some Rams fans who were at this Dons game to full-time Dons fans. He was going scorched earth. And you can bet that after this game right here, with all the eyeballs on the Rams now following the Dons' massive win, and following one of the most famous celebrities in America putting the Rams on blast, that Rams owner Dan Reeves had something to say about it. And in no uncertain terms, he did just what Costello did to his team and put Costello on blast. Because there were a few reasons why the Rams couldn't play the Dons for charity, and it had nothing to do with being scared to play or having a lot to lose. For one, teams back in the 1940s were not making money. This was especially true during the time of the AAFC, where there was such a rivalry with the NFL that the two leagues had teams constantly go in the red just to keep up and not fall behind and lose players to the rival league. It was not the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today. You had players working second jobs in the offseason and often retiring because their pay in their other job was too good. You had teams folding and relocating constantly, and you had teams that were not very stable financially. And the Rams couldn't afford to play a game for charity. They just couldn't. It's one thing to ask someone to donate $100 to a cause. It's another thing to ask a homeless person to do the same thing. They just don't have the money. The Rams had played 2 games for charity already in 1946. Those games were in the preseason. Across those 2 games, they raised over $100,000. But across those 2 games, while the charities benefited, the Rams made no money. In fact, they lost money. So playing a game for charity against the Dons just wasn't financially feasible. But even if it was feasible, and even if the Rams could be assured that they'd be in the black and would be making millions upon millions of dollars playing a game against this team right here in the Los Angeles Dons, it still wouldn't be possible. You think the NFL wants any of its teams competing against a team of a supposed inferior league? By rule at the time, NFL teams were not allowed to engage in contests against AAFC teams. If they broke the rule, the punishment was stiff, as the punishment was the literal loss of your franchise and banishment from the league. In other words, if the Rams decide to play the Dons, they'd be kicked out of the NFL, and the NFL would have no problem kicking them out, seeing as the Rams were the only team on the West Coast, and travel to and from Los Angeles between the other teams and the Rams was such a hassle as it was. Donating to charity is one thing. Donating to charity when you don't have the financial means to do so, and when you will be kicked out of your league, is an entirely different thing. The Rams' hands were tied here. If your neighbor wants you to lend them money when you don't have any money, when you've never met the middleman in the negotiation before, and when your family makes it clear that if you give this money to them, they'll divorce you and leave you, heck no, I'm not giving my neighbor any money. Would they like to help Lou Costello out? Of course they would. At least, I think they would, although I don't know, seeing as Costello and the Rams never even met before. But they had no options, and Reeves made it very clear that Costello was making his team out to be a villain when they were not that in the slightest bit. In a lengthy statement, Reeves put the kibosh on a possible game against the Dons and the threat made by Costello. As Reeves said, "I have never met Mr. Costello, and he has never approached me regarding his charity or any football game for its benefit. I have no doubt that it is a worthy one and that Mr. Costello is to be commended for his promotion of it. The Rams, too, have contributed their bit to charity by participating in preseason games. The net financial return for the Rams for these games resulted in an operational deficit. Incidentally, injuries received by certain of our players in these games proved a severe handicap to the team in its regular league season. Translation on that part? We got hurt playing these games that counted for nothing, and it's a big reason why after winning the NFL championship last year with a 9-1 record, we regressed and went 6-4-1, missing the postseason altogether. Plus, we can't play for every single charity, we just don't have the means to do so." Reeves continued, saying, "The fact is that the Rams are governed by the Constitution of the National Football League. This Constitution prohibits postseason games of any nature. Undoubtedly, Mr. Costello has been misled and does not realize that his proposal seems to contain, under the soft cloak of charity, a cold business maneuver intended to embarrass and injure the Rams in the eyes of the public because they cannot play the Dons. In other words, this is a manipulation tactic. Plain and simple, under the guise of charity, this is a manipulation tactic. The NFL wouldn't even allow us to have this scheme happen if we wanted to. And what you're trying to do by making the public think we're the bad guys for something that you never even contacted us about is wrong on so many levels. This was a guilt trip by Lou Costello without Costello understanding any of the facts. He just thought the Rams were ducking the idea of playing the Dons, which is odd because he never had contact with the Rams. But there were some awfully good reasons for that, where I can't blame the Rams here whatsoever. They're under no obligation to play this extra game, especially when they have nothing to gain from a player health standpoint, a prestige standpoint, a constitution of the league standpoint, or a financial standpoint. And for Costello to try and put the pressure on the Rams by announcing this falsehood in front of 27,000 people in the middle of this game we've been watching this entire time was not a smart move on his part, even if he was passionate about an extremely noble cause. Unsurprisingly, the Rams would never play the Dons, and that game for Lou Costello's foundation would never occur. And even though Costello and his charity were able to help out a ton of kids, they would get no money from a football game between two teams in the Los Angeles area. And even though Costello made the Rams out to be the bad guys here, you really can't say that the Rams are the bad guys here. This game between the Dons and the Bisons was notable on the field for how great the Dons looked, and was notable off the field for what was said during the game over the public address system by one of the most famous people in America. So that raises the question, What was Lou Costello thinking when he made that statement? I don't know. Third base. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.